the thing is that our educational system isn't really built to make us self-actualized. It's built to conform us and make us participate in society the way that society is currently structured, which is not necessarily correct.
Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, an exploration of the idea of curiosity and its increasing importance for thriving in the digital age, from the authors of The Curious Advantage.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Curious Advantage podcast. This series is about how individuals and organizations use the power of curiosity to drive success in their lives and businesses, especially in the context of our new digital reality. It brings to life the latest understanding from neuroscience, anthropology, history, business, and behaviourism about curiosity and makes these useful for everyone. My name is Paul Ashcroft. I'm one of the co-authors of the book, The Curious Advantage, and today I'm here with my co-author, Garrick Jones.
Hello.
And we're delighted to be joined by Doug Belshaw and Laura Hilliger. Hi, guys.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Hi, how are you doing?
Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast. Folks, we're delighted to have you on the show. We'll be really looking forward to talking to you today. Let's dive right in. Could you tell us a bit about yourselves, about your journey, and what you're currently working on? Doug, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So where should I start? I was born at a young age. I've grown from there. I used to be a teacher and senior leader in schools. I worked in universities. I worked for Mozilla, which is where I met Laura. I've been a consultant, worked with city and guilds, all different kinds of stuff. And the common thread, I guess, has been learning and technology and community work, which is what we work on at the co-op together, which we co-founded 7 years ago. So we work with all different kinds of clients on all different kinds of projects, but that is the common thread which binds it all together.
I was also born at a young age and have grown from there. I started my career in the Bay Area, working with social justice documentary filmmakers and teaching people who worked at Adobe how to use Adobe products, and sort of fell into this space between learning and technology, which is where I've been since. And as Doug said, at some point in the past, we both ended up working for the Mozilla Foundation. Mozilla is the corporation, makes Firefox, which is a browser probably people have heard of. And at the time, Mozilla was really focused on this learning technology and community piece and trying to help people develop the kinds of literacies that we need for the 21st century. And then Doug and I met, and actually we knew about each other through our research. So Doug has a doctorate in education. I have a master's in education. I stumbled upon his doctoral thesis and was like, ooh, I like this. This is great work. I should read this entire thing and rip off a bunch of it. And then I met Doug at Mozilla, and I was like, oh my God, Dr. Doug Belshaw. And we've been working together ever since. So
it's a fandom, really.
It started as a fandom, but now I know him really well.
Both ways.
Both ways. Excellent.
Yes.
Well, I like to think that one day Paul and I will get to that. But I tell you what's interesting, so interesting about the work that you do is, you've got this idea of the literacy that's required in the digital age about education, and that's fascinating to us. And the other thing is about the technology, which is also fascinating. And then you have an approach which I'd like to explore. I want to explore all these things, but you have an approach which goes beyond blockchain. And a lot of people say, oh, blockchain is going to be really important in the future going forward. And yes, we know it is possibly, but you guys have done a lot of real world research. You know what works, you know what gets things scaling. And you have this project, We Are Open, and you've got an approach to badging and all kinds of things which are useful, and which go beyond just the blockchain conversation. I'd love to ask you more about what We Are Open is all about.
Well, We Are Open is a limited company in the UK, but it's a cooperative, because you can't set up a straight up cooperative in the UK. It's a convoluted process. But basically, any co-op anywhere in the world adheres to the International Cooperative Alliance's 7 principles of cooperation. So no matter what your actual legal form is, you can be a co-op as long as you adhere to those principles. So these things are about, voluntary and open membership, about educating about the value of cooperation, about having kind of you don't necessarily have to have a completely flat structure, but you do have to have democratic decision making. So there's all these different principles you can go away and have a look about. But one of the wonderful things about being a co-op is that you're never alone. So even though we're quite a small co-op, we're part of several networks of co-ops. So for example, there's CoTech, Cooperative Technologists in the UK and beyond, which is a network of tech-focused co-ops. So if we need some developers to work on something, we don't have to hire them. We just go and work with one of our sister co-ops, which we've done several times before. We're also helping set up something called workers.coop. So every country has its own kind of chapter, as it were, of like registered body to be a co-op. So in the UK, it's Co-ops UK. But they've spun out something called workers.coop, which is to specifically help co-ops like ours, because if you're sitting there thinking, well, I know about co-ops because I know about banks and food shops and dairy farmers and that kind of thing. Well, that's very different to the kind of work that we do online as knowledge workers. So workers.coop is specifically trying to help bring about more cooperatives like ours, which have a democratic flat structure and allow people to work together in one organization, but also between organizations as well. It's kind of a rhizomatic thing.
Yeah, a rhizomatic I get and I love. Why is the cooperative structure so attractive? Why is the cooperative as a framework attractive to you guys?
I mean, for me, it has a lot to do with the idea that I don't have a boss. I am my own boss. And that is a really big deal, being able to have autonomy and control over your working life, being able to follow your passions, being able to work with people that you understand and have similar values. And so for me, like the cooperative structure, this was 7 years ago when we set up We Are Open Co-op. It was about finding solidarity with amongst ourselves. So at the time, we were all working independently. We met at Mozilla, but when we set up the co-op, I think it was actually after we had all left Mozilla and we were all working for different organizations.
We all left within about 18 months, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing is that we're called We Are Open, and we work in like a lot of open source, which is not just about code, but also about community and contribution. And I'm going to use the word synergy. There's a nice synergy between the world of cooperatives and the world of open source. And so, when we were talking about how can we support each other, how can we work together, this idea of being able to work in an open way is not something that everybody understands. And so we really all kind of took the values and the principles of open source and the values and the principles of cooperative structures and realized that it's quite similar, just different words, different semantics.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've always been interested in cooperatives. We have a long history of cooperatives in the UK, whether it's, for finance, building societies with cooperatives. We have something called the cooperative, which is all about people putting money into the same pot and being able to buy more, whether it's, homes or whether it's groceries. I also have some experience of a cooperative in the United States, in New York, where I have been a lot and lived for a long time. In Brooklyn, there's famously a cooperative, which has it's for groceries and has amazing stuff, but has very, very strict rules for how you are a member. And I think it was Ostrom who was the Nobel Prize winner who talks about the rules that are needed to...
Alan Ostrom.
Yeah, exactly. An amazing piece of work. But about how we work together, do you have any principles that you use to ensure that the cooperative achieves its aims from everyone?
Yes. So as Laura said, because we do everything openly, we try and update our wiki regularly to make sure that we have everything up to date. So on our wiki, we've got lots of the ways in which we do stuff. So for example, you mentioned there about like a central pot with your money. That's something which we talk about in the co-op. It's one of the benefits of being part of a co-op. So instead of us being individual freelancers or in some kind of hierarchical relationship with one another where one gets paid more or gets more decision-making, like 25% of our client budget goes into this central pot, which allows us to pay for some of the projects that we want to work on, or like marketing or business development or whatever it is that we're doing. So all those kind of principles and the way in which we make decisions are on the wiki, because some people listening to this might be thinking, well, hang on a minute, if everyone's equal, everything's flat, how do you ever make any decisions? How does anything ever get done? Well, I'll pass on to Laura to talk about that.
Well, we use sociocracy for decision-making in our cooperative. So, it's basically a human way of communicating. Like, communicating with other humans is hard. It's even harder when you work in remote environments. There's a lot of area for misunderstanding. And when it comes to decisions that affect all of us, that are about our business, then, it's one member, one vote. So, and sometimes people don't consent to a particular thing. And so we use a process called sociocracy to help us have the conversation that we need to have about a particular thing, and kind of get into the weeds, also emotionally, about why somebody might feel threatened by a particular decision. And this has been, this is really sociocracy, and conflict resolution is a big part of running a cooperative. Like, you have to, if everybody is equal, then it means everybody's voice matters. And that means that you have to actually get into what's going on inside of you to be able to, move anything forward. Because if we all just throw our toys out of the pram and stomp off when things get hard, then you're never going to, you're never actually going to resolve the conflict. So we really see conflict as opportunity, which is something that we have learned a lot. There's another cooperative called Outlandish, and they do a series of different workshops around co-op communication. So they have a sociocracy workshop, they have a conflict resolution workshop, and they also provide new co-ops with advice. They're called Outlandish. They're great. One of our sister co-ops, also in CoTech. Yeah, so it's.
I just want to comment on what you said there, Laura, actually, because sometimes people say, oh my goodness, that must just take forever, like having to deal with people's emotions rather than just deciding what to do and get things done. And I think that underestimates the amount of sabotage that happens within normal hierarchical organizations that I've definitely been part of before, when people don't agree with the decision that's been made because they didn't feel like they were part of it. And so what happens is people slow things down, people go and do their own thing anyway, whatever. And so what you're doing when you're part of a co-op, especially a small one, is you're getting alignment. Yeah, you're not necessarily saying everyone has to 100% agree on everything, but you're getting their consent so that they're not going to object, slow things down, and otherwise sabotage things later on.
It's a fascinating model, isn't it? And particularly in the modern world we live in, and how much that sort of open source model has accelerated development in the tech world. Is it a model that's interesting for people that, as you say, don't want to work within the confines of a big organizational structure? Do you think it's more curious? Because one of the C's of our Curious Advantage model is community, and the ability for folk to work successfully in community. Do you find that the cooperative structure supports curiosity?
So this is why I asked you if I could swear on this podcast. So there's this principle which is SOFA, which is start off and fuck achievements. And what that means is, like, you shouldn't be put off starting to do something like a creative project just because you think that you might fail, or you might not get some kind of award for it, or might not get the recognition for it. And embracing this is extremely liberating personally, but also within a co-op structure, if you've got the trust and the collaboration and the emotional intelligence of your colleagues kind of with you on the project, and also you're kind of in charge of the budget as much as everyone else is and everything like that, then you can follow your curiosity. Like, you can go down some paths which might be dead ends at the time, but then lo and behold, 18 months later on a client project, can take that half-done thing that you thought didn't really go anywhere, and because of the learning that you've had from that, you can now apply it to this client project which you thought was completely unrelated. So I definitely think it's a more curious thing to do, to start a co-op and be part of that kind of structure, rather than fitting in like as a cog in a machine in a hierarchical organization. For sure.
So Fred, start off and fuck achievement. Yes. I rather like that.
That's right. Yeah.
You love it. I love it. You're totally allowed to swear if you've got great models like that.
Now, one of the things that we understand, guys, that you are suffering at the moment, and we know you're very passionate about, is digital literacy. Could you tell us a bit about the work you're doing in digital literacy, and in particular, what is Voodoo Catagorisation? I love this term. What is Voodoo Catagorisation as well?
I can talk about this until the heat death of the universe. Laura, is there anything you want to say first?
Well, I think I would just start by saying that, the work that we've done, both of us, our entire careers, has had to do with like the skills and competencies that people need in order to achieve self-actualization. We're educators. We don't teach people how to, use a tool or something. We teach people how to think, how to be self-aware, how to embrace their messy humanness in order to create a life for themselves that is beneficial for their inner well-being, but also beneficial for society, civic participation, and really understanding the true value of education, which is to, learn how to exist as a human being in the world. And literacies, particularly digital literacies, are an area that we as in the 21st century, more and more required to help us think critically. We're bombarded with information nowadays that we have to sort through, and understanding where that information comes from, what that information means, sorting through what's real, what's not real, and finding how to exist in a world that is pervasive with technology is just a massive field that touches everything else. There is no industry that doesn't require digital literacies today, not a single one. You have to be able to use technology, and you have to be able to use it in a way that helps you actually advance as a human being. And so, a lot of the work that we do looks like it's going to be a tech project or it's an online community project. But at the end of the day, it's that true value of education, helping people become who they are and using a particular set of tools to do it. I went on a rant there because I'm very passionate about the digital literacies and education generally. Doug, you want to talk about Voodoo Catagorisation?
Yes, I just want to mention that people might be, again, listen to this thinking, well, how do I get started with this? How do I develop digital literacies in myself and others? And the first thing to say is that, like Laura said, they're plural because there's not just one definition, there's multiple competing definitions. Secondly, they're contextual, depends on what you're doing, the industry that you're in, whether you're in your house, whether you're in an office, they're contextual in that way. And the other thing is there are as many different definitions of digital literacy as there are researchers and people paying attention to it in the field. In the same way that you can right-click on a web page and kind of view source, you should be able to do that with the digital literacy framework that you are wanting to implement. You should know how the sausage was made. Is it like some young researcher, wet behind the ears who's had a cool idea, or is this a group of experts who've sat down and done lots of research and that kind of thing? You asked the question about Voodoo Catagorisation. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about the world of open educational resources and how you organize those. So open educational resources, I was an educator, I am an educator. There's lots of educational resources out there, and there's repositories of educational resources. And so the problem becomes, how do you organize them? And people spend their entire careers and several PhDs on this. But I've got some ideas about this too. So in the show notes, perhaps you can link to this particular blog post, which when I was product manager for MoodleNet, I put on that blog, and it's now on my personal blog. So this was relating back to Clay Shirky, which I'm guessing most people listening to this will be aware of. And back in 2005, he used this phrase, Voodoo Catagorisation. And he explained this as being the attempt to create a model that perfectly describes the world. And the voodoo part comes from when you try and act on that model and expect things to change in the world. Like you're sticking pins in the doll and you're expecting the world to change as a result. That's not the way things work. So the reason that we shouldn't try and force this voodoo categorization on people is that, first of all, it leads to signal loss. So I'm a historian by training. If you say, oh, the Bolshevik Revolution and the Russian Revolution are the same thing, I'd be like, well, yeah, kind of. But there's something that you're missing by trying to put those two things together. So you're kind of overestimating the signal loss when you treat them differently, but you're underestimating the signal loss when you treat them as the same. The other thing is that categories change over time. My grandma's favorite place to go on holiday when I was younger was Yugoslavia. That doesn't exist anymore. Laura lives in Dresden, which used to be East Germany, which doesn't exist anymore. So you can't expect to create categories and for those categories to persist over time. So these things, you might throw your hands up and think, well, it's impossible, but you can have contextual, time-bound categorization, which emerges from actual human practice.
So how does that relate to tagging? So, for example, tagging has fallen by the wayside in many areas, but it's also very alive in things like Instagram and whatever Elon Musk is calling Twitter these days. And tagging, is it still a great hope? How does that fit into Voodoo categorization?
This could take a long time, right? So talking about the history of tagging, right? So back in the early days when I was putting everything online, so my kids complained about the fact that like I had to go back and take baby pictures of them offline because back in 2007, it was entirely appropriate to put that kind of stuff online. And so I'd be on Flickr and I would be tagging photos and these tags would emerge. And that's called a folksonomy, i.e. it's not a top-down ontology of tagging. They emerge from the tags that people are actually using. So over time, you see tags change and emerge. And I guess you could do that kind of thing with Instagram and those kinds of things. I think the mistake to make is to expect people to be really fastidious about the metadata that they add to stuff that they upload. Like most people want to just, like getting people to add alt text onto an image that they post online to describe it for people who've got accessibility issues is enough. Like people can't even do that, never mind add the appropriate tag on and add all this different metadata. So the hope that I've got is that...
And sorry, just to interrupt, it's like, and lots of the tags that emerge are stupid. I mean, frankly, like just people having fun. There's no kind of integrity within the system because people can just be crazy if they want to be.
No, the other thing I was going to say about sort of emergent taxonomies like that, if a lot of our systems are case sensitive, typo sensitive. So you have somebody that is tagging something community all lowercase and something community with a capital C, and those two things don't show up together.
That's right. Just try and run a word cloud exercise.
Yeah, exactly. Remember when word clouds were a thing? That was like a fun couple of years in the mid-2000s.
In different shapes, yeah. So we've been on a client call today, actually, where we've been talking about tagging and like who should be able to tag within their community platform, who should be allowed to create a tag, who should be able to add a tag, that kind of thing. And the trouble is when you lock down tags too much, first of all, you get that signal loss and unstable categories. But second of all, you don't allow things to emerge, just like you've been talking about there. So like the Me Too hashtag, Black Lives Matter hashtag would not have emerged in a controlled tagging environment. So it's always a bit of a dance and a play. And people do use things in unexpected ways. And that's okay, because that's how we get progress. In the same way that you have to allow people to be able to break the law for there to be societal progress. Because if you can't break unjust laws, then you end up with dystopia.
We're listening to Doug Belshaw and Laura Hilliger. Doug Belshaw is a tech visionary, educator, and advocate for openness, renowned for pioneering digital literacies. He defended his doctoral thesis and authored The Essential Elements of Digital Literacies while leading Mozilla's web literacy efforts. He's an evangelist for web-native digital credentials. His global presence as a speaker and facilitator has reshaped conversations on open badges and beyond. And Laura Hilliger is a writer, educator, and open advocate. She's collaborated with Mozilla and Greenpeace International and champions education and social justice. Committed to the open web, she advances digital literacy, open education, and tech for positive societal change. She was also named the 2020 Women in IT Digital Leader of the Year for open principles in Greenpeace. I'm thinking about education and how this relates. I always remember the work that came out of the Ultra Lab, I think it was called, at the Anglia University, just near Cambridge, and East Anglia University, that's right, under Stephen Happel. And they did amazing work, like way before the internet, and really looking at what the future was. And as things became computerized, they got into databases and accesses of resources and all kinds of things that they thought would be important for education going forward. And much of what they predicted, I think, has become real. One of the things that I know that if you teach kids today, or if you, adults, you can pull on so many resources. There's so much visual material and video material and, people talking and teaching. And there's so much, we talk to the Khan Academy guys. It's astonishing what's available. But if a learner is faced with all of this stuff, how do they create a framework in which all of that becomes meaningful and they can be moved along a learning journey in a way that grows? Part of one of the reasons Paul and Simon and myself got into curiosity was because we were looking to try and deal with this, signal loss going forward, because digital is so narrow. Unless you have a mindset that allows you to kind of go out and explore and then come back, but you still need a framework. What's your views on where that framework comes from?
I mean, Doug has said a couple of times that frameworks are contextual, right? So if we're talking about education, and an educator or a teacher has actually quite a lot of power in how frameworks are implemented. So if for example, an educator has misinformation as part of their curriculum, and even if they don't know that it's misinformation, but the research wasn't there, or, there's bias happening, that actually can be transferred. And the people, adults, kids, it doesn't matter, whoever sees the educator as some sort of an authority figure that's able to introduce them to a particular topic and theme runs the risk of then, taking in that misinformation and replicating it further. It is a societal problem to figure out how do we help people, guide people. I think curiosity is actually a really interesting key here, because what we want to do is encourage people to be curious, but also to not have that curiosity stop when they hit up against something, to not just say, oh, I believe this, I'm going to move on in life, but to keep being curious over and over and over again, because things change. Even facts that we accept as facts today, science, biology, there are fields of study that can change the way that we think about things in the world. There's always something new to learn. And so getting too attached to a particular idea is staying curious is part of the key to making sure you don't fall into a hole that's hard to climb out of.
No, yeah, I kind of fully agree. Laura, I wanted to ask you, do you think that the algorithms that are underpinning a lot of the services that we consume online and therefore personalized experience are in some way dangerous or too narrowing? So for example, if I buy a lawnmower, somewhere on the internet forever, I'm being sold a new lawnmower. Why is it Netflix knows more about me than I do? Is it just taking me down a single path? And yeah, okay, I get fed more of the stuff I like, but I'm not exposed to the stuff that might be new or interesting. So, are these algorithms helpful for us? What do you think?
I personally, and this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I think the algorithms are really stupid. If you have been watching Netflix with your partner for, a while, and then, I don't know, your kid shows up, your grandkid, the neighbor's kid, whatever, shows up and starts watching cartoons for a week, the algorithm is then, a nice mess. And it's not easy to, shift it back. And it's funny, because maybe it's just the way that that the algorithm sees me and the way that I use my tech, but I make a conscious effort to trick the algorithm so that I see more things, because I'm very much aware that because I listen to classical music when I'm working, Spotify thinks that I am just the biggest Vivaldi freak, and I'm not at all. I just can't listen to lyrics while I'm working.
I'm the same.
I've got so much to say about this. So the first thing is that I've been a Spotify premium subscriber for 14 years now, since I sold my CD collection in 2009. I previously worked at HMV, so I had a massive CD collection. So you will take Spotify out of my cold dead hands, because the algorithm is entirely tuned to the exact music that I like, whether I'm in the gym, relaxing, working, whatever. That being said, I got an iPod earlier this year, completely overhauled it, put in an SSD, all that kind of stuff, bought one of those Apple hi-fi room speakers so that I've got what to me is quite an analog thing, even though it's entirely digital. It's my equivalent as a 42-year-old of people having vinyl record player. That is the kind of analog version for me. The other thing I wanted to kind of piggyback on Laura's comments were that about 10 years ago, I talked a lot about curriculum as algorithm and about how we can adapt curricula to the needs of learners. So, for example, Khan Academy had that curriculum map, which is like a series of stars and helping people navigate through that. And I think that even back when I was in the classroom, trying to help educators understand that they, with the dawn of digital technology, are never going to be the final authority on a particular subject. So they have to take in all of these different things coming in the room. And I also find it really disingenuous when we're talking about online learning, that when people have learned in a really deep way about a topic, they then go back and give people like hoops to jump through, like absolute stages that they have to go through when they didn't learn that way themselves. So there was a wonderful project as part of the Mozilla Open Badges work, the Mozilla Discovery Project. And they interviewed people who were like top in their field about how they got to be there. And lo and behold, they didn't follow a step-by-step program, but they followed their curiosity. They went down rabbit holes. They found stuff out that wasn't useful, that was useful later on. They did what looked like mistakes at the time, that kind of thing. So that's interesting to me. The other thing, as the parent of a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old, is that when I was in the classroom, phones were just starting to be powerful enough to be like smartphones kind of thing. And it must be terrifying now. But you kind of, as a teacher, as a school, you provided the ed tech. Like the ed tech was provided institutionally. Whereas now, learners bring the ed tech with them because it's on their phones and their laptops and whatever, which means that the institution is no longer in control of the means of learning and how they can access stuff. And even you see universities banning laptops in lecture theatres as if the laptop's the problem rather than the method of delivery for the lecture. So all of this stuff happening is really interesting, and it's curious because learners want to have more than they're getting from the institution, but the institution wants to limit their learning to what's provided.
I can tell you the best example I've seen of an institution which has tackled this has been the work that we did at the London School of Economics. And the LSE has two departments. One is called the TLC, which is the Teacher and Learning Center, and supports teachers in how you teach, your methods of teaching, your personality, and how you can be a better teacher, all those kinds of technologies. And then the Center for Learning Technology, the CLT, is the one that is focused on what are the latest technologies that you can use to support in the classroom. And as a result, you have this continuous dialogue between method and technology and teachers trying to do better. It's easier in a university setting because you can prescribe some of the technology that they're using. But they had to recognize that the infrastructure was changing, and although they want to be as open as possible and provide them, the best, students need to have some kind of a place which is the tech home for their learning, if you know what I mean. Again, otherwise they're all over the place and they're in a labyrinth which they can't make through. So I agree with you.
Exactly. This is why the learning management system is like a zombie that keeps on living forever.
We're seeing this absolutely at the moment with generative AI tools, right? Where schools, universities, even businesses are trying to figure out how do they incorporate this into the way they educate and learn. What's your view of that?
Well, just really quickly, because I'm interested in what Laura has to say about this, just to follow up on the last point as well. When I was in schools, interactive whiteboards were like the things which were being rolled out. So institutional technology. And so the lead-in time was like, well, how fast can you get the interactive whiteboards in? How fast can you get the Wi-Fi access points and stuff? Whereas now, and this is the reason why generative AI, ChatGPT and stuff, built into Snapchat, all that kind of stuff is so important, is the lead time from that being launched to kids using that to cheat in inverted commas on their assessment is zero. It's the next day. And schools and institutions aren't in charge of that. So that becomes a huge problem for the way in which institutions do assessment. And because you have no lead-in time, you just get massive panic throughout the industry. Whereas actually, we should have been able to see this coming.
The lead-in time for interactive whiteboards is not just about the technology. It's also about the teachers using it. right? So the number of interactive whiteboards in the classroom that are basically used as something to stick a poster on or a normal whiteboard is probably absurd.
And just another point about what the LSE did about 5 or maybe 7 years ago was require everybody to submit digitally. And then all submissions were run through a very, very powerful computer which checked every submission for any form of plagiarism at all. And, even if they plagiarized themselves. Well, that created a kind of weird I don't know what it is, but a kind of weird fascist environment in which to learn. And students found it very, very stressful. And you can't game the system. I mean, it was very weird. What AI has done has destroyed that completely, because there's so much data being driven through the system which comes from various tools that has undermined the plagiarism issue completely. So, back to the drawing board. What I think the problem from my perspective, I'd be interested to hear what both of you have to say about this, is that it's because of the way of teaching. If you're going to do a top-down, the teacher is boss type teaching scenario, you're going to be overwhelmed with all of this technology trying to, keep kids in their place. But I think if you have a completely different way of teaching and learning through experience, learning through self-discovery and so on, I think you start to get better learning outcomes. And that, I think, is one of the things that's in where the tension is between old styles, Victorian styles of learning and teaching, and what's now emerging in this kind of technology-driven environment. What do you think, Laura?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because just last week or the week before, while Doug was away, we were asked to provide some feedback on an AI positioning paper for the Internet Governance Forum from the UN. They're having a conference sometime in October, and they're putting this AI paper forward. And the position statement is called Higher Education's Essential Role in Preparing Humanity for the Artificial Intelligence Revolution. And it is a positioning statement that is about how educators need to be involved in the discussion around AI and what is developed, where, the guide rails are, the kinds of regulation that we're going to need with all of these advancements in technology. And in our response, the number one of like 10 or 11 things that we talked about in that paper was about the historical lessons of education in the past. So for years, we have made similar calls about educators being involved in how technology is rolled out, the way that schools are governed, the way that teaching and learning happens. Like, we have been yelling for 15 years about digital literacies, computational theory, social media awareness, misinformation, disinformation, all these media-centric themes that change our society and change the way that we as a species interact with each other and industries and all of this stuff. And we know that despite the fact that educators have long said, hey, the way that we organize our schools, the way that we organize our curriculum, the way that we are educating is not what's best for the learner. And then layer on top of that the tools that we're given, things are slow to change. So Garrick, you're right. I think either Doug or I would agree that experiential learning, curious learning, not top-down learning is better for the learner. The problem is that the economics of this kind of exploratory learning are quite difficult. You take a teacher who has 50 kids in their classroom because the school district doesn't have enough funding for more teachers, who are, by the way, very underpaid. And it's quite hard to do some kind of like workshop-based learning, project-based learning. The thing is that our educational system isn't really built to make us self-actualized. It's built to conform us and make us like participate in society the way that society is currently structured, which is not necessarily correct.
Yeah, there's a couple of things about that. So having been a teacher and having known lots of teachers and being part of families of teachers, all of the ones who try and change the system end up leaving the system because they have been successful in the system themselves, and then they become teachers. And when they realize they don't want to perpetuate the system, the antibodies of the system get rid of them. That's what tends to happen. The other thing is talking about how AI changes assessment. So Maha Bali, who's at the American University of Cairo, I did a workshop with her in Kuwait just before the pandemic and stuff. She has responded to this by saying, well, look, okay, let's say I'm doing an assessment. I now can't ask the questions I was asking before because students can just turn things in written by ChatGPT. So what am I going to do? I'm going to ask them much more personal questions. I'm going to ask them to reflect on their personal experience, so they have to bring some of themselves to it. Now, if this is the outcome of ChatGPT and assessments, meaning that learning gets more personalized and the way that we grade people is on their own application of learning to their context, that's got to be a good thing. Like that's a tick in my box. So I'm actually quite optimistic that we've had a lot of time to be able to change our education systems and assessments. The crisis point means that you have to do something about it now as an institution, as a system. And so we'll see what the system comes up with as a response. I hope it's not more authoritarianism and draconian lockdown and Turnitin and other platforms doing more plagiarism detection, because that's just terrible.
You're listening to the Curious Advantage podcast, inspired by the book The Curious Advantage, written by Paul Ashcroft, Simon Brown, and Garrick Jones. Subscribe to the podcast today.
I know you do a lot of work with Greenpeace, and we were fascinated by your research, but also the work you're doing there and around critical incidents and how Greenpeace and others are working to solve and deal with critical incidents. Could you talk a bit about, to the extent you can, the work that you've been doing there? Because that's fascinating.
Yeah, so I started working with Greenpeace 8 years ago, 2015 or so. And at the time, I started working with Greenpeace because they were looking for someone who sort of embodied open principles, open values to help them become more open as an organization. So the history of Greenpeace, they started out as a fully open organization. They told everybody everything that they were doing. And like the first campaign that they had was about stopping a test of a hydrogen bomb on an island off the coast of northern Canada outside of Vancouver. And the founders of Greenpeace, it was called Don't Make a Wave Committee. And what they did was they basically used media to tell their story and created what they called a mind bomb in the minds of the people. And so they took cameras and they went out on this boat and they put their bodies between an island and this hydrogen bomb, and they created this giant stir. And they told everybody everything that they were doing. And when the cops showed up, they just kept doing it. And they, true activists. But Greenpeace is a 50-year-old organization. It is a global nonprofit. It's one of the most recognized brands in the world. And over time, they became quite secretive because of reasons. They do a lot of things that are a bit outside of what they are maybe allowed to do. So when I started working with Greenpeace, I was really excited because I was inspired. I've always been inspired by this organization. They create real change. They are responsible for a number of environmental and ecological policies that we take for granted nowadays. So I have worked on quite a few different projects with Greenpeace over the 8 years. But for the past 3 years, we have been, so at the co-op, we are open. Doug and I have been collaborating very closely with Greenpeace to create a learning program inside of the organization to help people deal with critical incident management, so communications management. So essentially, big brands can, they do things that other people don't agree with. There's, things like bad press or boycotts, internet shaming, PR nightmares, just, people who have a problem with the way things are done, in activist organizations. And these brand crises are something that the organization then needs to respond to. And so we've been working on a learning program inside Greenpeace International to help communication experts learn how to actually deal with these crises should they pop up.
Can I just say the fascinating thing that you haven't mentioned so far is that, and maybe you're going to get onto it, is that unlike most learning designs, we're trying to get people stressed.
Yeah.
We're trying to put people under pressure.
Yeah. So, learning programs are supposed to create a safe space for learning. And with this particular thematic, it is a very interesting experiential learning structure because you cannot learn how you will react to a critical incident or a crisis without actually believing that you're in one. Everybody always thinks that if they're attacked, they're going to fight back. But studies show that that's not true at all. Like some people freeze, some people just cannot respond, or they respond in an unmeasured way or inappropriate way when emotion gets involved. And for some of the types of crises that an activist organization has, the range of human emotion that one might experience, depending on what the scenario is everything. Like it can be very, very hard to be able to represent the organization and the values of that organization when you're stressed. And so with this learning program, we have to create a safe space so that people can learn, but we also need to create enough stress that they, that they can respond honestly to whatever the input is. Yeah, so it's been, like I said, we've been working on it for 3 years. We were asked not to talk about it. And over the 3 years, I pushed and pushed and pushed and said, this is so cool. We should talk about this in real life. And finally got the permission to talk about it. So I just published the first post in a series of posts about this program last week. Post number 2 and 3 are mostly done, and we'll be publishing them in the next couple of weeks.
It's brilliant work. Look, I'm curious, did you find a balance between creating the safe space for learning and simulating enough stress in the system so that you're not just shutting people down, they're still able to learn?
It's quite interesting because like in a learning situation, people know that they're part of a training. So it's harder to actually create the stressful environment than you might think, because people know that they're safe and that it's a training situation. And so actually initiating stress is what's kind of tricky about it. And the program had actually been an in-person training program. And then the pandemic hit, and then they were like, oh, we have to keep doing this training. We need people who are skilled comms professionals to be able to react to the kinds of critical incidents or crisis that might occur, especially in an online environment. So they asked us to help them get it online, to make it fully digital. And stressing people out in real life and stressing people out in a digital space are very different. And it's great because we've run the training a number of times, the first training in the series. We learned a lot from the pilot, which we launched in December 2021. We ran a pilot and we learned so much from the people that took part, and we learned, where the lines were fuzzy. And we did some iterations. And so now it's run a number of times inside of the organization. And like I said, we're just starting to talk about it more broadly.
Yeah, brilliant. I can certainly tell you that I don't think I've ever experienced anything as stressful as running an online learning program and technology not working. That's, I can tell you, that's very stressful. And we'll include all links to your blogs and your research below in the podcast, so people who are interested can find out more about them. It's been such a brilliant conversation as we come in towards the end of this particular podcast. A couple more questions. About curiosity. What are you personally curious about at the moment? Why don't, Doug, we ask you first?
Yeah, so we haven't talked much about open badges, but I've been unreasonably excited about a metadata standard for now 12 years. And the reason I'm excited about it is because it allows us to recognize learning and achievements and behaviors and skills that happen everywhere. And so as that technology and as our understanding of what it means to achieve things outside of the bounds of formal education increases, the more excited I get. And in fact, the latest version of Open Badges aligns with the verifiable credentials standard. So, in a few years' time, your driving license and your passport and stuff will be entirely digital, pretty much, on your phone and stuff. And the same standard that uses that is the same standard that you can use as an individual person to issue some kind of credential or recognition to everyone else. So this continues to fascinate me, and I'm really curious about it. And we were over in Colorado at the Badge Summit in July this year, and there's just a worldwide community of people who continue to fascinate me.
I think it's really needed this, right? It's a brilliant research area. The idea of being able to, having your learning record portable, taking it with you from wherever you are, and including, as you say, all kinds of things in your learning record, whether it's a language, whether it's your driving license and your identity, or whether it's a piece of learning you did. I'm also very curious to see where that goes next. Laura, what are you personally curious about?
I'm actually constantly curious. It's it's just a base level for me. I'm curious about all kinds of things all the time. However, I've recently started building furniture out of wood. It is a crazy, crazy world to self-make furniture. I've never done it before. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm learning, and I'm very curious to see how that skill set develops when I get tired of it. It's a lot of sanding if you build furniture, which means a lot of noise. But I've made some cool stuff, and it's completely not digital. It's very haptic. And this is like, yeah, go for it.
Fascinating. Can I recommend highly, when you have the time, YouTube for Japanese wooden interlocking joints?
I don't think I'm at that level yet, but but okay.
I swear, no one's at that level.
If it says Japanese at the beginning, I'm like, oh, that's too hard.
No, I don't. It's unbelievable. It's amazing what you say about building things and being completely analog. It's just brilliant. It's just brilliant. I think you're ahead of the trend. I think there's a lot of people who are going in that direction, like the making community. I mean, making community is fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've always been a maker, and a lot of that making has been digital during my career. But I'm starting to get back to making things physical. That's good to turn off.
We've had an amazing conversation with ideas such as the sociocracy, co-ops as hierarchy, the curiosity and SOFA, which means start often, fuck achievements. I like saying that. And Ostrom in practice, which is amazing. Making the case for co-ops stimulating curiosity, Voodoo Catagorisation, achieving self-actualizing in education, embracing messy humanness, digital literacy as a core skill alongside curiosity, of course, signal loss, that's why we're doing this, categories changing over time, tagging, and the folksonomy, love that, the emergence of tags within a system, the curriculum as the algorithm, AI positioning, higher education's essential role for educating all of us to self-actualize and also take on board what AI is bringing to the world. Pros and cons of personalization algorithms, future of tech and education, new governments of schools, the call for digital literacy and new organizations of schools and learners, experiential learning, and the economics of change. It's difficult to change because it costs, and how we have to change the ecosystem to enable this new education to emerge. Education for self-actualization, we've said, but open badges and verifiable credential standards, which are fast emerging, and they may not be what you thought they were going to be. So, and we're learning a lot. It's such a brilliant area. Fantastic conversation, Doug and Laura. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'm going to ask you now, what's the one thing that you would like to leave with our listeners? Laura, you first.
Wow. So, as you were rambling that off, and I was like, we talked about all of that in an hour. Okay. The one thing, we are open is there in the internet. We are doing all kinds of things. We're always looking for interesting people and projects and socially responsible folks who want to make the world a better place. Get in touch.
I'm going to cheekily do too, because I'm a nonconformist. So on my bio, I've got a quote from Epictetus, the ancient Greek philosopher, which says, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." And I think that's an important thing to do. And the second kind of linked thing is that Steve Jobs famously said that everything around you has been created and designed by someone who's no smarter than you are. I'd like to apply that to the systems that you exist within, the organizations that you work within, and even the capitalist system, which we all exist within as well. So just remember that.
So we all too have a chance and a role in shaping that future. Lovely. Doug, Laura, it's been a brilliant conversation. We are very grateful for you joining us here today. Thank you. You've been listening to a Curious Advantage podcast. We're curious to hear from you. If you think there was something useful or valuable from this conversation, we encourage you to write a review for the podcast on your preferred channel saying why this was so and what you've learned from it. We always appreciate hearing our listeners' thoughts and having a curious conversation. Join today, #CuriousAdvantage. Curious Advantage book is available on Amazon worldwide. Order your physical, digital or audio book now to further explore the 7 C's model for being curious. Subscribe today and keep exploring curiously. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Curious Advantage podcast.
The Curious Advantage book is now available to purchase on Amazon.
Stay tuned for the next episode and keep exploring curiously. This podcast is produced by Aliki Palinelli and John McGinty and edited by Jill Damatak-Futter.